It doesn't, it's a little too simplistic to say, I mean, like the Paul Goodman thing. Yeah, up to a certain point, you would say, well, like, be friendly with each other, or be honest, or something. But you're not going to be honest with some other person, because, the classic cases of the police is coming for somebody, and are you just going to... So it's a little misleading just to make general statements like that, I think. Yes?
Where do you think the failure to include diversity in the rebirth comes from? And more importantly, do you see an obvious point of entry for reconciling that?
I'm not sure I understand, like, when you say rebirth, are you talking about the chapter that...
Yeah,
okay.
And how I connected to
Yeah.
that is in my experience here in communities that may revolve around transformation, even talking about the Zen Center, for example, there's an obvious lack of diversity that really strikes a chord with me, and I'm really interested what your thoughts are on that.
Of course, I just read a little teeny part. This is from the beginning of that chapter. I'm talking about utopian speculations and so on, and how they can be interesting. But, far from being too extravagant, most fictional utopias are too narrow, generally being limited to a monolithic implementation of the author's pet ideas. As Marie-Louise Berneri notes in the best survey of the field, Journey Through Utopia, all utopias are, of course, the expression of personal preferences. But the authors usually have the conceit to assume that their personal tastes should be enacted into laws. If they are early risers, the whole of their imaginary community will have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. If they dislike women's makeup, to use it is made a crime, etc. So here's me again. If there is one thing that can be confidently predicted about the new society, it's that it will be far more diverse than any one person's imagination or any possible description. Different communities will reflect every sort of taste, aesthetic and scientific, mystical and rationalist, high-tech, neo-primitive, solitary, communal, industrious, lazy, Spartan, Epicurean, traditional, experimental, continually evolving in all sorts of new and unforeseeable combinations. I don't know if that speaks exactly to what you were thinking of, but one of the things that I think was important about how I wrote this is that when I did get to the point of how the society would be, I didn't just say, how would I like it? Like, oh, I like things quiet, or I like this kind of music, or something. I start out with the notion that there can be an immense amount of diversity, like different communities having different laws, or whatever, they organizing themselves in different ways, so that a lot of these things, like a struggle over is it going to be this or this, can be superseded in that way. Not everything, but a lot of things can be, well, over here, this is where we're low tech. Over here, we're high tech. Over here, we meditate all the time. Over here, we party all the time. Over here, we do, whatever. There's no reason that all sorts of different things can't coexist.
Yeah, I guess what I'm hearing is like the existence of communities that each do it their own way, that are all equally valid and necessary, but I'm interested in the integration of those things in a singular community, and I'm wondering if that's really possible.
Well, we can find out. See, there's another thing. We don't have to decide or know everything in advance. All we can do is say that right now, maybe people find it hard to do that because they have conflicting interests. Like maybe they're fighting over money for something, or this or that. Whereas under more favorable circumstances where everybody is comfortable and has the basic things, then they're more likely to say, I don't care what they do 5 miles away in that you know, we'll do this here. And when they, probably out of that will come, people will come together, but they'll come together as independent people, you know, without having to all be the same kind of thing. Rael?
Is there anybody here who works blue collar or pink collar jobs?
That's a teacher.
Yeah, what's that
Talk to
about?
me during the break.
Comment on the utopia. Fassbender, the filmmaker, said that society lets you have your idea of what utopia is, so that's something to keep in mind. Utopias don't come out of the sky. I mean, it's out of the society that you're in.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. When you talked about diversification, did Alvin Toffler's Future Shock had any bearing on economic and social diversification? Or are you familiar with that?
I read it a long time ago, and I can't say whether it's, I don't think so particularly, but yes.
When you learned French, had you studied it or you just taught
Just a little bit in high school, and you know, like a year in college. And if you've had an experience, you realize that you forget everything. And so basically, almost nothing. But when this came up, you know, I still had a grammar book, and I sort of vaguely knew. So I wasn't starting totally from scratch, but almost.
Nice.
Yes.
I'm wondering what your opinion is of the current situation in Tunisia, if you have any insight into.
Is that a situationist or
Well,
spectacle?
I don't know very much about it, but I was just with an email with one of my French friends, the co-translator of that Vietnam book today, and she said, I'm very enthused by this, and she was born in Tunisia. So you can be sure that she is following it, you know, vastly closer than I am. I just seen a few articles here and there.
Yeah, Mustafa Kayati was in Tunisia.
That's also, right, one of the more significant situationists was a Tunisian. Anyway, I have the impression that it's significant, you know. So to say, is this situation, well, that's kind of not the point. The point is, it looks like it's a significant popular revolution. So it doesn't, it's not relevant to say, oh yeah, but these people are blah, 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 or this. It's these kind of things, once they start, will go farther. And it looks very promising. It's already spread to Egypt.
Yeah.
One thing that's relevant to say, to point out here, is that their internet has been a huge influence on
Yeah.
this thing because,
According to who?
well, for
Many-
one thing, like, WikiLeaks has pissed off a lot of people, and it's
This wouldn't have happened
Yeah,
without
I mean,
WikiLeaks, because that's
and
where
I
all the
think
info that they're complaining about started.
And
They
also
had to-
just, you know,
yeah.
I think that the internet has had an influence on people's ability to just quickly communicate and, you know, organize.
People in
And-
Tunisia know what's going on in Cairo instantly, and that didn't
it's
used to be the
spreading.
case.
Yeah,
They can
it's
see
spreading all
videos, the
over.
very practically live,
Yeah.
all that.
But it also started with somebody setting himself on fire.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these other
Become the
other
trust
things.
But I'm just saying that it's interesting to
One
look
of your
at.
most significant breaks from what you could call orthodox situationist stuff would be your stance on religion and the realization and suppression of religion. You make a comparison to what the situationists were talking about with art and what you're talking about with religion. Do you still see that as important?
Yeah, yeah.
You want to expand on that at all?
Well, just for those of you who don't know what he's talking about, I wrote in 1977 a pamphlet about religion that was largely addressed to the situationist scene because situationists are vehemently anti-religious, just as most secular European radicals are, of all kinds. And I had felt that that this, although much of this was justified, that this also was kind of a blind spot. And so in this pamphlet I started to say, well, piece this apart a little bit instead of just saying it's all bullshit. There are some, so that's another little pamphlet that, as Lee said, it was an extreme case where I was colliding head-on with the whole situationist scene. And a lot of people, there are still people in France who will not speak with me. And that's 33 years ago, because they've said this is unacceptable. He's
Including DeBoer while he was still alive, right?
for example. Yes, Sally.
When I was very young, I was a Taoist, and it sort of blossomed into becoming an anarchist, and so I sort of found they were very connected, and still do. And I was wondering why you said that your Zen Buddhist practice and your situationist interest are incompatible, are not compatible. I was wondering why you felt they weren't, or thought they weren't.
Well, they're incompatible and they're compatible. You know, I'm stressing that, you know, from how they start out, you could find a lot of extreme clashes. From both sides would look at the other and say, "Good grief, what the hell is that?" It's my feeling that they actually did have a lot more in common, but it's a delicate question because they're so far apart that you sort of have to pick out and say, well, you couldn't put the total trips of each of them together and expect that, you know, so I have to say, well, where is the flaw here, or where does this leave out something that can come from here? So I think that they do go together, but in order to put them together, you've got to do some fine tuning of like, you can't just say, oh, that's cool, they're the same thing, because they aren't.
Thank you,
Having been observing the scene since 1946, I've seen a lot of happenings and recoveries and collapses and regenerations. And the thing that I notice right now is that really good things never make it to the top right now, in my experience. The University Press, for example, has published Tom Parkinson and
That's her husband.
and at least Foster, Duncan, and Spicer, and Snyder, and I don't see this now. I mean, you're under the rubric of city lights, which is an eminence, but I don't see anybody picked up by the mainstream of elite experience of the arts in any form: poetry, painting, sculpture, even theater. So something's wrong.
Well, that's depressing.
I think it also proliferates on the internet.
I mean, the question is why isn't it picked up?
Maybe you're not looking at the top.
I mean, I heard about situationism from Ken Knabb personally, from some arcane errand I took in his direction, but I didn't get it in the bookstores of Berkeley, or out on the tables,
Which is a little
or
surprising.
from the press, or from the magazines of the press.
Even in the late 60s. I would have thought that that's
Bill?
To tag on a little bit to what Erin was saying, but when you get the take from Ken Knabb rather than some more commoditized form of it, you also, you know, when you get exposed to somebody who's come from the actual interaction with people rather than a stereotype, rather than an abstract thesis about it, you can find some richness in terms of the politics and the artistry and the experience of it that you're not going to get in most predigested versions. so that sometimes not being able to pick something up from the mainstream does have, it's positive because you're not getting the Disney version. You're not seeing the demonic parody of what you really need.
To continue what Bill was saying, there are in universities, at certain universities, there are books and specialists and the situationists and so on, and most of them aren't very good. Most of them don't know what they're talking about. They sort of have some of the facts right, but not all. But basically, none of them would have ever conceived of doing the kind of stuff that they're writing. You know, they're writing about the situationists or the lettrists in the 50s, and it's kind of romantic now, just like writing about the surrealists or something. You know, it's not occurring to them to look at their own lives, to look at their current thing, to say, what does this mean? And in all due immodesty, you know, that thing that I was reading about Snyder or some of these other things, it's not that they're that big a deal. You know, you can look at that and say, well, this was kind of a lame thing, and he didn't do it very well, and he was nervous, and blah, blah, blah. But it was significant because as a person, I was doing something that was a real experiment. You know, it was the farthest thing in the world from writing a paper to please a professor or getting a book accepted by some publisher or something like that. I was, as far as I was concerned, I was inventing something that didn't even, a genre. I said, what is the genre of something where you write a leaflet that's criticizing a situation, but you're not quite sure where you are, and so in the process of writing the leaflet, you're freaking out and you're changing your mind rapidly, and then going there, and what am I going to do? I know some of these people. Am I going crazy? All these kind of things. But that's actually the sign of something, in my view, something really good happening. Because when I look at that later, I say, man, that was great. You know, and it's not that it was a great success or anything like that, but it was, I knew when I was dashing away there, I thought, this is it. You know, it's like a Satori or something. It's like, now I understand. And I had been reading situationist stuff for several months and talking with these people and sort of understanding some things and very intrigued and all that. But it was still a little bit distant. You know, it was like, well, what, hypothetically, what would it be to disrupt something or blah, blah, blah. But as soon as I did that, bam, you know, I knew. And I've met so many people over that's 40 years ago, how many hundreds or thousands of people who have read situationist stuff and blah, 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 and most of them don't get it. And the reason they don't get it is that it's just something they read. They didn't put themselves on the line like that. And De Boer and some of those people, in different ways than I, but in a kind of comparable thing, they did put themselves on the line. And as a result, you know, it's a liberating thing. They've come through so many different things, and the people just a little bit over to the fringes can look at that, and from the outside it may look like they're part of the same scene, but from the inside you can see these other people are just looking, and they're just bargain shopping for different trips, and oh yeah, I know him, or yeah, I've read that book, or here's my opinion on this. But they're not, they haven't gone through this kind of nitty-gritty thing. I'm not sure how I got off on that tangent. Elaine?
Well, I think that's what action, direct action is, or being actually involved in the revolutionary process, which is what I was saying is a constant thing that's happening, not just something that you sit around and talk about and like, you know, analyze Marx about and then wait for the sudden crisis to happen, as you said in your book, and then like suddenly, oh, the time is ripe for revolution. It's always happening. It leaps all the time, which is what John Ross was his point. It's not like a process.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if that was exactly what he was talking about, but the thing is that at any moment, right now we have kind of an interesting moment that's a little untypical, I hope. But even in more banal kind of situations or something, there are always many openings, you know, and we can look and say, what can I do with this? And I'm not saying do some weird disruption 24 hours a day. That would be ridiculous. You would flop and you'd go insane and get fired and, you know, but I'm saying to be aware of that kind of thing, and then you can choose. At a certain point, something will come up, and you can say, well, I could do this, but on the other hand, I could do this kind of weird thing over here. Challenge myself, or challenge those people, or something. And you can do it. You can challenge external things. There's nothing wrong with that. I could have disrupted a Maoist group, or a right-wing group, or something, and that would have been fine. But the difference is that I wouldn't have been challenging myself, also. I would have been doing something that I could do blindfolded. And that's okay, that has its function too. But in this case, as I said, I picked the hardest topic in the world. Anybody besides Snyder would have been easier for me to say, oh, they've got these problems or blah, blah, blah. I picked the guy that was really tough for me. And, you know, and because I did that, and demystified him, just kind of puncturing a balloon, I still admire Snyder greatly. I know him a little bit, and I read all his stuff, and there's tons of things to learn from him. It had nothing to do with putting him down. But what it has to do is putting things in perspective, where I'm just looking at him, he's just another person, and having done that, I'm not intimidated by anybody else since then, because I had sort of passed the person who could have intimidated me the most. I did it, and so I realized I survived. You know, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with it.
If we were to put Zen Buddhism into the service of situationist methodology, what would be an example?
Well, I find that it helps, you know, when I've been doing all this stuff, especially in the last 25 years, but even before then, there were times when Zazen, meditation, or just the idea of focusing on what you're doing, you know, every day, that was kind of in the back of my mind. And so I don't know that I can pinpoint and say, well, this shows some Zen influence or something, but it's one thing like where I've gone through a lot of tumultuous stuff in these scenes, and many of my contemporaries did not survive it. I don't mean physically, but they ended up just kind of, oh, I never want to hear about that again. I'm sick of that stuff. I went through that. We were in these groups. We did this thing, and blah, blah, blah. And here I am, 40 years later, and I'm not sick of it. It's not that I'm seeking. I mean, there are some things that, and part of the reason is that I think that I've faced some of these things when they came and said, well, okay, what is this? You know, what? Addressed it sometimes in writing a pamphlet, sometimes just in a conversation or in thinking about it. But whatever, it's helped me keep my head screwed on something.
That's important. It seems like being at peace with oneself and sort of it's really sort of a important precursor to being effective.
I mean, it never hurts to be lucid, just like people, you know, like with
to be at peace with yourself.
Karate and.
Well, it's like the Snyder essay you have on your website about the personal transformation in the East and social revolution in the West.
The two things kind of complement each other. Yeah. And they can help.
Isn't it also a question of deconditioning to some extent? And dissolving your character in Mike's sense to some extent?
Yeah, so any of a number of things. Zen isn't the only thing. That happens to be what I've practiced, but people can do different kind of psychotherapies or yeah, all kinds of stuff that can sort of, as Lee says, decondition you in some way, where you're not locked in a compulsive mental thing. And so when you become a little more lucid, you're going to do anything better. It could be radical, or it could even be reactionary, or something. You know, whatever you do, you're just going to focus on it more instead of being caught up in your little trips. Rail?
Break.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Is that, do people feel like a break and then, okay? And I'm, as I said, I'm happy to hang around. In fact,
That's
we came here, and this has been an experiment for me, and my first impression is that it went fine, but just like with that thing I read you about, I wasn't quite sure where it was going to go, and probably that will happen if I do more things like this or something. But my aim here is that when you leave here, you're not going to think Ken Knabb is real cool, or Ken Knabb is boring, or he's not as interesting as this, or he's more interesting as that. That's of minor interest. What's really interesting is what you do. And what you do could be something completely different than what I'm talking about. I mean, I have no idea. You have your own lives. But the point is, there's, at the end of my autobiography, I picked up this other quote from Whitman. And it says, I round and finish little, if anything, and could not, consistently with my scheme. The reader will always have his or her part to do, just as much as I have had mine. I seek less to state or display any theme or thought, and more to bring you, reader, into the atmosphere of the theme or thought, there to pursue your own flight. So that's kind of what I'm aiming at. I don't know if will have succeeded, but that's up to you as well as up to me. But I'd like to continue if you have any other questions or comments. Again, as much as possible, focusing on, what are we doing, what this kind of, I think I've said enough. Gifford?
Well, this is an anecdotal story, but it answers Ariel's question. And it also has an aspect of internet dating. It was 10 years ago, and I actually posted something that said, does anyone, it was like in May of whatever year, 2001, does anyone get romantic about May in '68 and think of the barricades in Paris? And somebody responded, and we had a date. And she'd come from Texas, and she did her PhD dissertation on Guy Debord. And we met, and we had glasses of wine, and it was a romantic dinner. And I said, oh, well, what did you do in Texas besides writing about Guy Debord? She said, oh, I work for HR. And I was like, oh, God. Who for? Enron. And so it's one of these anti-Satori, she's not using it for these Satori, looking for a new way to, a practice of living. It was just an academic thing she did. So there are negative aspects of recuperating Debord's work that I think is why, the really innovative stuff doesn't get published by the big publishers, because it's kind of the academic world has been so monopolized by the commodity. And I think that's what we're living through right now.
Well, she might have had a little awakening at the end of her stint at Enron.
Yeah, well, she probably was laying everybody off, and then she got laid off. Story.
Yeah. What kind of projects are you working on now? What kind of weird, on putting yourself on the line, disruptive experiments are you engaged with or are you planning now?
Well, you got me there. Of course, online dating involves some of that, but it's not particularly subversive. It's just, but you are putting yourself online, and unexpected things do happen. Well, I would say this thing tonight, actually, if you wanted an example. As I said, I didn't know how it would turn out. I just kind of fell in.